When using the term split brain, we are referring to when the corpus callosum is severed. The corpus callosum is a structure made of nervous tissues, and when cut, it divides the brain into left and right hemispheres. Michael Gazzaniga, author of the article The Split Brain in Man, goes into depth about his studies pertaining to people whose brains have been split. Prior to Gazzaniga's research, many people believed that when severed, the right and left hemispheres of the brain functioned independently. Gazzaniga uses previously known information to further study 4 split brain patients. Over a span of 5 years, Gazzaniga and his team were able to analyze the abilities and evaluate the overall change in brain capacity of these patients. Gazzaniga studied various sensory aspects pertaining to the brain and its functionalities, specifically sight, speech, touch, motor control, audibility, and linguistics, as well as understanding that the 2 hemispheres function independently after the corpus callosum was cut. Previous studies also revealed that there was no significant change in the patient's temperament, personality, or intelligence as a result of the surgery. There was no exact experiment performed to analyze the patient's behaviors, but the author did use both visual and tactile tests over the 5-year span in order to better understand and evaluate the changes. He used various methods to test each sensory aspect, such as flashing green and red lights to test sight, and then using that test as well to evaluate speech by seeing if the patient could tell the instructor what color was flashed in either the right or left hemisphere. The interesting find from the study was that when a light was flashed in the left eye, the patient could not report what color has been flashed, although when a light was flashed in the right, the patient could report the correct color. This showed an issue with the processing of information in the right hemisphere. Some of the other methods used by Gazzaniga in terms of tactile methods was using a grab bag and grabbing an item blindly simply by listening to a description of the particular item that the instructor wanted the patient to grab. After executing the various methods in order to evaluate brain functioning, the results held up consistently across all tests. All in all, the main theme within the 6 senses is the change in ability to verbally report what was processed through the right hemisphere. If an object or test was presented solely to the left eye/right hemisphere, the patient was unable to verbally articulate what was occurring. This finding questioned the knowledge that most of the language processing centers are in the left hemisphere of the brain. In conclusion, Gazzaniga discovered various changes in the brain that occurred because of surgery. One of the helpful things that he found was the idea of cross-cueing. This can be most easily defined as the ability of a split brain patient to cue the right hemisphere, which is struggling with processing, by using the information known from the left hemisphere. For example, in the study when red and green lights were flashed to the left hemisphere in a certain pattern, the patients tried to remember this in order to make an educated guess when the lights were flashed to the right hemisphere. Aside from cross-cueing, another interesting find was the idea that during childhood, the right hemisphere is used just as much as the left hemisphere in order to process linguistic abilities. This is interesting because in some time between childhood and adulthood, most of the linguistic abilities of the right hemisphere is lost. The phenomenon warrants further experiments and research on the development of the brain over an extended period of time. Finally, there is hope for those patients who may feel disappointed or defeated by the idea that half of their brain is functioning slower than the other. Scientists tested split-brain monkeys and found that their attention span and task performance time were twice as fast as monkeys with an intact corpus callosum. Ultimately, Gazzaniga was able to establish various important findings pertaining to the change in mental capacities within split-brain patients, but there is still a lot to learn. There is a possibility that one day this operation could be performed without the major decline in the right side language processing abilities.